So students, let's discuss some important classes of drugs and their therapeutic effect. The first class is antacids. We all come across a problem, a very common problem, that is acidity. Why does acidity takes place? It is due to the presence of excess of hydrochloric acid in the stomach. Now there is a compound named histamine that we discussed earlier. Histamine induces the excessive production of hydrochloric acid. So, according to the knowledge of drug-target interaction, we can now say that if a drug is present that can suppress histamine or suppress the effect of histamine, then we can control the problem acidity. So, a drug named cimetidine was designed to prevent the action of histamine. You can see the structure of cimetidine in the screen. Another drug and another example of antacid is ranitidine. Ranitidine is also known as Zantac. You can see the structure of ranitidine in the screen. So, we come across two important antacids that are cimetidine and ranitidine. Now, let's move on to another class of drugs, that is antihistamines. We have discussed histamine in proper detail. Histamine is not only limited to the secretion of hydrochloric acid or inflammation in our body. It is also responsible for problems like nasal congestion in our body. Also, it is responsible for allergies that we face due to some substances around us. So, in such problems, we require drugs which are antihistamines. Some important examples of antihistamines are brompheniramine and terfenadine. You can see the structure of brompheniramine in the screen and terfenadine. So, these two are important classes or important examples of antihistamines. Now, let's move on to another important class of drugs, that is neurologically active drugs. These drugs affect the message transfer mechanism of our body. There are two classes of neurologically active drugs. These are tranquilizers and analgesics. Let's discuss tranquilizers in details. Tranquilizers are the drugs that we need to take in conditions such as stress, mental illness, depression, etc. Tranquilizers are also known as antidepressant drugs. Some important examples of tranquilizers are phenelzine and apranoside. You can see the structures of both these drugs on the screen. There is another subclass of tranquilizer and these are barbiturates. What are barbiturates? Barbiturates are sleep-producing drugs. Some important examples of barbiturates are Veronal, Valium and serotonin. Now, another important class of drugs, that is analgesics. Analgesics have two categories, narcotic and non-narcotic. First of all, what are analgesics? These are drugs which helps in pain relief. In case of any kind of pain, we can take these drugs. The two classifications, narcotic and non-narcotic. Under narcotic, we have morphine and its homologous. Narcotic drugs are drugs which will help in relieving of the pain but with some kind of side effects, whereas non-narcotic drugs are simple pain relieving drugs without any kind of side effects. Important non-narcotic drugs are aspirin, paracetamol, whereas narcotic drugs will include morphine and its homologous. So now let's move on to another class of drugs, that is antimicrobials. What are antimicrobials? We know that microorganisms like bacteria, fungi, viruses, these kind of microorganisms grow and this can lead to a major problem. So, there are drugs which reduces or inhibits the growth of these microorganisms. Antimicrobials can be classified into three categories. These three classes are antibiotics, antiseptics and disinfectants. Let's first discuss antibiotics. What are antibiotics? Antiseptics are the drugs which are used to treat infections that occur in our body. These infections occur when small microorganisms grow rapidly, and though in general terms antibiotic can be considered as the chemicals or the drugs which inhibit the action of microorganisms on our body. Now, there was a scientist, Paul Ehrlich, who discovered an antibiotic named salvarsan was invented, which was used for the treatment of syphilis. Yet, this antibiotic had some side effects on human body. Antibiotic salvarsan had many side effects. It was proved to be very much effective on the bacteria spirochete. Now, let's discuss the classification of antibiotics. Antibiotics affect the bacteria. Some antibiotics affect the bacteria by killing it, some by inhibiting it. So, in these two classification, we have bactericidal, that is killing effect, and bacteriostatic. So, under bactericidal antibiotics, we have penicillin, aminoglycosides, ofloxacin. Under bacteriostatic antibiotics, we have erythromycin, tetracycline, and chloramphenicol. Now, another classification of antibiotics is based on what range of bacteria it is affected on. So, the first is broad spectrum antibiotics. Broad spectrum antibiotics are effective on large number of gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria. We have three examples: amoxicillin, ampicillin, and chloramphenicol. The second category is narrow spectrum antibiotics, which is limited to narrow range of bacteria. The example is penicillin. The third category is limited spectrum. So, this is all about all the important examples of antibiotics. Now, let's move on to another class of antimicrobials, that is antiseptics. The most common antiseptic that we see in our home is Dettol. What is Dettol made up of? The most common antiseptic that we see in our home is Dettol. What are antiseptics? Antiseptics is applied when there is any kind of cut or wound in our skin. Now, what is Dettol made up of? Dettol is made up of chloroxylalone and terpineol. These two terms are very important to be noted down. Next kind of antiseptic is iodoform, which is another important example of antiseptic drugs. So, now let's move on to another class of antimicrobials, and that is disinfectants. Disinfectants are chemicals or drugs which are applied to objects. These have actions on objects and they kill the microbial growth on any kind of furnitures or any kind of substances. We apply disinfectants in floors, furnitures, etc. Now, some examples of disinfectants are phenol. Phenol is a very important example of disinfectant, but 0.2% of phenol acts as antiseptic while 1% of phenol acts as disinfectant. One important thing to be noted is that there is a difference between disinfectants and antiseptics. Disinfectants are harmful to skin. They can't be applied to skin. Whereas antiseptics can be applied and it is only for. There is a very important thing to be noted is that there is a difference between disinfectants and antiseptics. We cannot apply disinfectants in our body because it is harmful to our body. That's why we can only apply disinfectants to objects. Phenol in 0.2% can be used as antiseptic while in 1% it acts as disinfectant. Some important examples of disinfectants are chlorine in 0.2 to 0.4% and sulfur dioxide. So, this is all about antimicrobials. Now, let's move on to another class of drugs, that is anti-fertility drugs. Now, let's discuss anti-fertility drugs. Increased populations has led to severe problems. So, At present time, family planning has become very important. Anti-fertility drugs works in this direction. Anti-fertility drugs are composed of synthetic progesterone or estrogen. This helps in inhibiting pregnancy. Some important examples of anti-fertility drugs are norethindrone and ethinyl estradiol. You can see the structures of both these drugs in the screen. Anti-fertility drugs are made up of synthetic progesterone or estrogen. These hormones are progesterone inhibits ovulation and thus it inhibits pregnancy. Some important examples of anti-fertility drugs are norethindrone and ethinyl estradiol. You can see the structures of both these drugs on the screen. And so this is all about anti-fertility drugs, and I hope you all got a brief about all the drugs that we discussed under all the classifications. One important thing to be noted is that all the structures are very important of all the drugs. So now let's move on to chemicals that are used in food elements. Chemicals in food. Why do we need to add chemicals in food? For their preservation, for enhancing their appeal, and last, to increase its nutritional values. There are some categories of this kind of chemicals that we add in our food. These are food colors, flavors and stabilizers, fat emulsifiers, flavor improvers, antioxidants, preservers, and nutritional values. Except the last category, all these chemicals that we add does not contain any kind of nutritional value. We add these chemicals either for their preservation or making it more appealing. Now, let's discuss some artificial sweetening agents. We know that we take sucrose, that is sugar, in our diet, but sucrose is responsible for intake of calories and many people avoid it. So, in that case, we need some artificial sweetening agents. What are these artificial sweetening agents? These artificial sweetening agents can be used instead of sucrose, which provide sweetness. The first artificial sweetener is saccharin. Saccharin is a very important artificial sweetener. Other examples are aspartame. Aspartame is used in cold foods because it is unstable at cooking temperature. The second example is allitame. Allitame is a highly potential sugar, and so in case of allitame, the sweetness is too high to be controlled. The third example is sucralose. Sucralose is a very useful artificial sweetening agent since it does not provide any kind of calories. So, these are important examples of artificial sweetening agents. Now, food preservatives. Food preservatives are added in order to control the spoilage of food due to microbial action. Some important examples of food preservatives are table salt, vegetable oils, sugar, or sodium benzoate. You can see the pictures of these elements in the screen. So, this is all about chemicals in food. Now we will discuss chemicals in cleansing agents. Now let's discuss chemicals that are involved in cleansing agents. In cleansing agents or detergents, we have soaps and synthetic detergents. What are soaps? Soaps are sodium or potassium salts of long chain carboxylic acid. You can see a reaction on the screen. In this reaction, sodium stearate is the soap, which is made up by the reaction of sodium hydroxide with glyceryl ester of stearic acid. So, in simple language, soaps are made up of sodium salts or potassium salts with the reaction of long chain carboxylic acid. Now, let's discuss what are the types of soaps. There are different types of soap. You can see in the chart what are the types of soaps present? These are toilet soaps, transparent soaps, soaps that float in water, shaving soaps, medicated soaps, laundry soaps, soap powders and scoring soaps, and soap powders and scoring soaps, and soap chips. So these are the different types of soaps which are prepared and which are used by us in our day-to-day life. Now, one important thing to be noted down for soap is that soap does not work in hard water. Why is it so? Because hard water contains calcium ions. Now, these soaps, when come in contact with these calcium ions, they form insoluble precipitate, and thus it does not work in hard water. Now, let's discuss about detergents, that is synthetic detergents. Synthetic detergents are chemicals that act as soaps but are not soap. There is a difference between synthetic detergent and soap. Synthetic detergent can work both in hard water and soft water, while soaps cannot. There are three classifications of synthetic detergents. What are they? These are anionic detergents, cationic detergents, and non-ionic detergents. Anionic detergents are used in our household work and in toothpaste also. Cationic detergents are very expensive, and so it is less used, but it is used in fabric softener, wetting agents, etc. Last is our non-ionic detergents. Non-ionic detergents are used in liquid dishwashing detergents. And so this is all about synthetic detergents and soaps. So here our chapter ends and we studied about all the chemicals that are involved in food, medicines and cleansing agents. So students, we discussed firstly the drugs and the classification, their therapeutic effect. Then we discussed the chemicals that are used in our food, and last we discussed about the chemicals that are used as cleansing agents. So here I conclude this lecture.